Gotcha.
Hey, how's it going everybody? It's the Game Economist back with another Dark Souls 3 PvP guide. Today we'll be taking a look at the Splitleaf Greatsword. So in a nutshell, the reason people care about this weapon is because it has a true combo that nets about 750 to 800 damage. It goes like this: neutral R1, weapon art, R2. It could be R1 as well, but I go with the R2. So that true combo, it basically outdamages most of the ultra weapons in the game. Is pretty ridiculous, because once you've dealt 750 damage to your opponent, they're at a point in their health bar where they don't want to trade anymore, so they start playing more carefully. And they're already playing carefully because they don't want to trade into you, right? So other than that, this is a pretty typical halberd. It's just one that does a lot of damage. The wind wheel weapon art, it's kind of a unique weapon art where it has no recovery frames, meaning you can go into it and roll out of it at any time. I've heard that you can spam this really well, but when I tested it out, it didn't really feel like it had any point to spamming it, because it didn't feel like on its own it was a very effective way to hit anybody, especially somebody who knew what they were doing. So I don't think spamming the weapon art is that effective, which means you really are counting on your neutral R1 to catch opponents, because your two-handed R2 is that awful hula hoop move where you like spin twice and you have a ton of recovery frames when you use that. So you really don't want to be using the R2 two-handed very often. The one-handed R2 is not bad though. It's the typical right to left, just a swipe that's off time, so your opponent might not time, they might panic roll and get caught by it. So yeah, that's it for this weapon. It's not a very exciting weapon other than the fact that it's infusible, is buffable, and it deals a shit ton of damage. That's all it really comes down to. You could totally go with the Dark Moon Blade build, infuse it to Sharp probably. I was doing some numbers testing and it looks like Sharp gets the best damage output. So you'd probably take this to Sharp and then you'd, put a Dark Moon Blade on it, and I don't know, if you're dealing about 750 to 800 damage with a Dark Infusion, then with the Dark Moon Blade, from experience, I know you're probably going to be dealing somewhere between 800 to 1000 damage, somewhere in that area. Depends on what your opponent's wearing, really. Let's talk a little bit about the weaknesses of this weapon. I think some of you guys are really wondering, how do I beat this weapon? Because you run into it probably more often than any other halberd in the arena. The first thing I can say is that all halberds are weak to quickstep. Halberds, kind of similar to spears, don't have very good tracking, right? So if you kind of get on the side or behind somebody who's using the halberd, they're forced to roll away. That's how it is, because they know they're not going to be able to swing again and catch you. If they do that, all you have to do is take one more step and backstab them. So that's one of the biggest weaknesses of halberds, is they don't have very good tracking. And if you watch my footage, you can see that I've got in my main hand a backup Estoc as well as a backup longsword that I will swap to whenever I'm in trouble. And I let my opponent know, you can't just crowd me, you can't just go around me like that. Kind of let them know that I'm keeping an eye on their tactic and doing my best to scare them out of it. Right? So the longsword will help you counter daggers. It will also help you counter turtles, which is probably the most effective counter to this halberd, is turtles. It doesn't deal enough damage on its neutral R1 to be that scary to a turtle. You see, if you're fighting like an ultra weapon, let's say the Dark Estoc Greatsword, right? That's an ultra greatsword. And you were just walking up to them and you decide, hey, I'm just going to block his R1. Well, if you do that, you're going to take a big chunk of damage. With the halberd, since the damage is split up between 3 moves, you're not really as taking as big of a chunk, and it starts to be a small enough amount that you're willing to absorb it. That's what I'm trying to say. Especially if you brought a counter shield to your opponent's infusion type, right? If your opponent went physical, you can bring Black Knight shield, of course, will do fine. A lot of shields will do fine against a pure physical. But if he's going dark, you can bring the Cathedral Knight Great Shield. You'll have to have enough strength in order to wield that, right? Or if you went with the Chaos Infusion, you can probably use the Black Iron Shield at that point to counter his Chaos Infused version of it. So, yeah, countering with shields is probably the most effective strategy, because ultimately you can keep a longsword as a backup with the Splitleaf Halberd, but you don't want to be swapping over to your longsword all the time. That weapon, the weapon swap is kind of a dangerous. In the middle of the swap, you can get punished. And then if you were to just offhand that means you're not carrying a blessed item, right? And if you're offhanding it, it means you're only using the one-handed attack on the halberd, which means no true combo, which is what we really care about on this weapon, right? So I think shields are the best counter to the Splitleaf. And yeah, that's all it comes down to. Your opponent tries to wrap around you, you're forced to roll. When you roll, if he times his R1 correctly, he can roll catch you, right? Daggers are always going to be kind of a weaker counter in my opinion because they are so susceptible to being countered by longswords. You don't even have to bring your halberd back out, just keep your longsword out. Alright, well I rambled on a bit. I can say one more thing about it. I've used the Greatsword, Ultra Greatsword a lot. And these two weapons have very comparable damage output. The big difference between them is that the Splitleaf Greatsword has much better running attack, and the Greatsword, Ultra Greatsword has a far more useful R2. And I think that's it. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.